Hello, I'm Paul du Toit. I'm a presentation skills coach. I'm a certified speaking professional and the author of You Can Present with Confidence. I'm often asked the question, do people automatically know how to present, or is it a skill that needs to be taught and learned? Well, I'm afraid that the contrary is very much the case, because perhaps 1 in 100 people are naturals at presenting. So why is this? And the answer quite simply is that in the old tribal days, if you had to cast your mind back, the only person that ever gave speeches was the chief himself, and the only person that he ever taught to give speeches was his son, who would then succeed him later on. For the rest of us, we have to learn how to give speeches and presentations. And we need to be in a position that if we are going to be getting up in front of an audience and delivering some kind of presentation, that we know exactly how to do that so that we can get the results that we want from our presentation. There are many aspects involved. There are things like the way you look, the way you speak, the way you use your voice, hand gestures, the way you stand, perhaps even the way you put visuals on the screen, and what about how you answer questions. So all these kinds of things, including all the logistical arrangements, are part of being able to present confidently. Now, in this series of tips, I'm going to hone in specifically on the most important areas of presenting, including all the basics, so that one day, once you've accumulated and learned all these things and you've developed experience, you'll be able to get up in front of an audience, convince them and dazzle them, and get exactly the results that you're looking for. So I look forward to you coming on this journey with me. So let's talk a little bit about self-confidence and self-belief, and some of the things that trip us up and make us nervous about presenting. In the back of our minds, no matter how good we are, there is always a degree of self-doubt. And the self-doubt that we have depends very much on, firstly, the experience that we have and the training we've had that has built us up to the level that we are at any particular time. But I'd like to use an analogy to perhaps put this into perspective. When you learned to drive a car, you knew that you couldn't drive a car. So the first time that you sat behind the wheel of that car and the instructor told you what to do, there was things that you had to familiarize yourself with, like the clutch and the changing of the gears and pulling off smoothly and so on and so forth. When it didn't go right, you gave yourself a little bit of a break because you realized that you were still learning. But with presentations or speeches, it's a little bit different because we know that we can speak. So when we mess up presenting, it seems to puzzle us, and our brains are looking for an excuse and a reason. And because we can't find it, we fall back on simply saying to ourselves, well, I'm just not good at presenting. Now that's patently unfair, because the best presenters are firstly very experienced, and they've usually had quite a bit of training. So the combination of the training and the experience is what helps them to be great presenters. What you need to do in order to become really efficient at presenting is give yourself all the training necessary. That may be by watching good speakers, it's by reading a certain amount and getting some coaching. And if you combine those and you add experience to them, you will be surprised at how effective you can be at getting the results that you want out of presenting. One of the first things that many presenters struggle with is that feeling of not having sufficient self-belief. And self-belief comes in 2 specific areas. The one is perhaps not enough belief in what you're talking about. But to me, most importantly, the self-belief is how you feel about yourself. And self-belief comes from a number of different areas. The one is simply thinking that you can present effectively. In other words, having that confidence in the back of your mind that you know what you're doing. But it's also got a lot to do with preparation and understanding that you've done enough preparation to know what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, the length of time that you're going to be using, and that you're sufficiently prepared that you get up for your presentation knowing what's going to happen and knowing how it's going to end. Now this involves perhaps preparation of the highest order. And one of the most crucial things is to understand how to use time effectively. Now, how does time really come into presentations? I mean, is that not time management? Well, it is time management, but it's time management that is related specifically to presenting. So there are things like, for instance, how long do you need in order to get your presentation together? Is it 10 days? Is it 1 day? Is it 5 days? Is it 4 hours? And that depends very much on the length of your presentation. But what I always like to do is to give myself a few extra days to get my presentation together, especially if it's a new one, just so that if there are things that happen in between, that I'm not thrown out on a limb and find myself under pressure right towards the end. Now, there are other things as well. If you're putting together a slideshow, how much time do you need for the prep of that slideshow? If you're a day or so before your presentation, have you had a chance to look at your venue and make sure that it's appropriate for your presentation needs? Have you had a chance to find out if the air conditioning is working properly, if the seating is going to be appropriate, if the logistics are all in place, if your equipment is going to actually speak to the data projector that's available on the day? And all these things take time and preparation. So one of the first things that one needs to realize is that if you're able to use time effectively, you immediately take the pressure off yourself and you find yourself better able to arrive prepared and in a position to give a great presentation. So when you're delivering a presentation, are you in fact allowed to move your feet or not? The simple answer to that is yes, you are allowed to move your feet, but you're not allowed to shuffle around in an uncomfortable way. The ideal position is to have your feet planted on the ground as if a nail has been driven into each foot to give you a completely still stance. But perhaps you might pose a question here, and if you are then going to move, that movement should be slow and deliberate so that you don't look as if you're nervous. And eventually when you get to a particular position on the stage, you may then perhaps answer a question that you posed when you were over there while discussing it en route to getting to this particular point. What you simply don't want to do is to be pacing up and down like a caged tiger, and you also don't want to be standing in a very stiff position. You also don't want to be shuffling your feet in an uncomfortable way or moving your knees about. You certainly don't want to be doing a hip sway, and you don't want to be rocking. This is the half rock. When you do it back on your heels, it's regarded as being the full rock. It's much better if you're going to move to simply do a nice, easy pace like I've done now, and then plant yourself in a particular position and say what it is that you want to say. And then as far as body posture is concerned, you want your shoulders back, you want to be looking at your audience, and if your audience is in an auditorium style, you want to make sure that you keep eye contact with the entire audience by moving in an absolutely natural way and perhaps having a little bit of a twist, but not too heavy a twist. So those are just a few tips about moving your feet, moving your body, and having a great posture that I hope you'll be able to use when you rehearse in front of the mirror. More tips to follow.